Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happiness, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happiness, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. Keisha Blair is an economist who lost her husband when she was just 31. She later wrote an article with the 40 life lessons she learned from this tragedy. That article went viral and led her down a new path. She's now the best-selling author of Holistic Wealth, 32 Life Lessons to help you find purpose, prosperity, and happiness. Those lessons can help us all get a better grip on these uncertain times. Keisha, who lives in Ottawa, Canada, advises people how to handle their hard-won nest egg so it covers their lifespan. She also has lots of life experience and soul to share. I'm here today with Keisha Blair. She's talking to me from Canada. From where in Canada, Keisha?
I'm in Ottawa.
And I even say that wrong. I would have said Ottawa, but you're saying that a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think different people, pronounce it a bit different.
Maybe that's apricot, right?
Yes.
So Keisha, I want to just jump right into this and ask you, I know that you lost your husband when you were 31, which is so jarring for all of us. I have friends that have lost husbands at 55 and 65, but that's a different one. How did you, and you've gone so far since then, and we're all in a challenging time right now where we're experiencing different forms of loss. How did you lift yourself up after the loss of your husband at such a young age?
Yeah, no, it was devastating. And, the situation that we're in now brings back the memories for me of that, because it is so similar in terms of the context. He had a very rare illness that's so rare that most doctors will never see it in their lifetime, only in textbooks.
Wow. And
even from a biochemical perspective, most doctors won't know how to test for it, if they come upon a patient with it. So very, very similar to the situation where we're dealing with an enemy that we have no idea and we're learning day by day. It actually took them 1 year after they assembled a team of experts, pathologists, coroners from across North America to examine the case. That's how rare it is. And it's exactly like what's happening today, the uncertainty, the fear, the anxiety, not knowing what's going on. Something hit you like a ton of bricks and you have no frame of reference, and the doctors have no frame of reference. They've never seen this before. And so with COVID-19, it's just bringing back all of that to me. And it's so familiar, though, in a very eerie way, because I feel like I've walked this road already. And so in the face of uncertainty, what I had to do was to take a moment just to pause and to self-reflect and to think about this journey that I had been on and what I really wanted for my life in terms of leaving a legacy, in terms of what I wanted to be remembered for, and just in terms of what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it really added to my life or it didn't. And I know that a lot of us are in the space now of being home, not being in our regular routines. And so a lot of that will be jarring, but some of it will be, well, let me take the space to just sit down and think about some of my activities and what I'm doing in life. And this pandemic, I'm sure, is putting people in the frame of mind of what's really important. And so in coming out of that period of uncertainty and grief and tragedy, what really came out at me was, okay, so what's important? What do I want my life to stand for? And are some of the things I'm doing really necessary? And so I'm sure for a lot of us, we think about what we're doing now. We're like, whoa, I think I would have lived my life a bit different if I was staring my mortality in the face. And so that's what I did in trying to to get through this. And so I think, this book is so relevant for the times for sure.
Absolutely. Did you go through stages? I'm a longtime journalist, Keisha, and this reminds me of the story they tell you when you start studying journalism about, people looking at an elephant but they can't see, and somebody grabs one piece of it and says, it's a snake, and only far much later they realize, wait, that's the trunk. Wait, there are legs. Wait, there's a huge body. Wait, this is an elephant. It's not what I thought it was at all. But it can be a bewildering process when you go through something like that. This is a little bit how I look at this pandemic that we're in, because I'm an old news lady and the news moves so fast and it changes so much, and the sources are all over the place, and so it's complicated. And I want to return to the present, but did you go through stages? Like, did you go through a stage of denial, kind of like a lot of people have when they continue to go on spring break despite the pandemic?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't go through denial, but I love your analogy a while ago. It really just brought back so much, just even me hearing you talk about the trunk and no, this is a foot and where's the body? Because I went through a year where upon hearing that, his disease was so rare, they kept vials of his blood for testing and investigation just to help them. And the hospital called one day and they're like, it could be genetic. We don't know. So asking for your permission to test his blood. And I said, go right ahead. This might help our family in terms of, with my kids. And they sent that away and came back and said, no, this was not genetic, just a sporadic thing, just pop out of nowhere. And so we were getting ready to test the kids in the process. And upon getting those results, we heard, oh, yeah, no, you don't have to test the kids anymore. So, yes, I went through a process of, oh, my God, wait a minute. What are we dealing with now? What's the enemy here? It took us a year just to get the autopsy. And even after the autopsy, there was another year of, oh, my gosh, is this genetic? Is it sporadic? Yeah. Testing his blood, me finding out that they did have his live cells even 1.5 years afterwards. Oh, wow. And everything about this was so bizarre. And I had to just start writing, even to just leave a legacy for the kids, because I just could not imagine the level of uncertainty and the level of, oh my gosh, nobody knows what this is. And that's what I walked through personally. And yes, it took me a while. I wasn't in denial, but you know how they talk about those stages of grief. I did not go through those in any linear pattern. Like I have another manuscript for a book about grief, and I refer to grief in there as mushrooms, not yeast, because it just didn't follow this linear process. Like it's like mushrooms that pops up overnight, after a rainfall, after a downpour, and so some stages happened all at once. And for me, because we didn't know what the enemy was, I went through almost 2 years of uncertainty. And you can imagine, it wasn't a pandemic like this that became a public health emergency because we're dealing with one life. Right. So it took that much longer for them to find out what he died of and whether or not my kids would suffer the same fate, or the risk for them would be somewhat higher than the general population. So we walked that road. And
you walked it. You walked it somewhat alone. I mean, you had children, but you walked it alone as a seasoned adult.
Yes,
kind of a seasoned adult at 31. Although I have a 26-year-old, and I'm thinking that is not an adult. But as much as I love her, I have a singer-songwriter 26. No, she's lovely, but I'm just saying I realized that 30 is younger than I thought.
No, for sure.
Well, you mentioned, Keisha, what I love, this idea of writing. I had to write. So I'm sifting for coping mechanisms. What does the human spirit grasp onto when seeking and trying to make sense of things? You said writing. Did that come in the form of journaling? I'm looking for ways that we can help people now who face the same bizarre, not the same, but just a very odd uncertainty all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. Journaling, yes. Writing, did you sit down to write a book, or did you write to make sense of your world? Because you're a writer.
Yes, exactly. And I write in my day job. So yes, so I started writing fairly early, and it didn't come in the form of a journal, but coincidentally, this book is based on a viral article
Yes.
that was published. And in that viral article, I talk about one of the life lessons for me is journaling. And I started writing before I journaled, but one of the life lessons is I think we should journal before we write. The reason I'm saying that is because I missed so much. And so this book started off as a memoir, that manuscript I just mentioned. I set it aside when this article went viral because an agent said, this is the book you should write first. Write this book. You
You've
have to write to
obviously
list it
struck a
well.
chord. When something goes viral, Keisha, you've clearly, inadvertently or not, struck a chord. It reverberates, and you
Exactly.
grab that chord and put the
And
rest
you
down.
grab it. Exactly. And she said, put down that memoir for now, let's get this out. And I said, of course, that makes sense. But, when I was writing that memoir, what came to me is I should have had a journal, because I would have journaled everything. And so I
Oh,
feel
wow.
like journaling right now, especially in this pandemic, is so important. And I talk about, one whole chapter in my book is about journaling because it's so important. It's like your therapist. It's calling to memory your emotions, and you're documenting how you went through it step by step, day by day, every single day, and you're charting your emotions, and hopefully you're seeing a positive upswing, a positive improvement. But if not, even if it's negative, it helps us to be very self-aware.
Right.
And so one whole chapter is journaling. And yes, I think for all of us now, I think it will be an amazing process to journal this. It has so many therapeutic effects, journaling right now, and just writing down emotions on a day-to-day basis and just taking an inventory of them. And that's something I talk about too in the article, because I felt like for me, when I went through this process, I found myself, when I call them the dry bones, these are the metaphorical emotions that might not be, negative emotions, that the fear, the anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
the worry, the uncertainty. And for that first year, I went through a lot of that. And I realized I was spending too much time going back over, the day that it happened and what I could have done, and what the doctors could have done. And that's, that made me realize that I needed to look to the future and not the past. And I think with journaling, back to your question, is that's what
Yeah.
it will help us realize. Are we on the right track? And do our thoughts situate us too firmly in the past? And realizing that we need to look to the future now. It's just too much on the past. So I
Yeah.
think in terms of things that we can do in this pandemic, journaling is definitely a big one, and as well as spending time in nature and getting out. Social distancing, yes, but the world around us is still so important. Of course, reaching out to others and paying it forward. And there's so many lessons that I learned going through this process that, being in this pandemic has just called back to for everything.
Absolutely. And I read lots of academic research, and I was reading recently and interviewing somebody who did research on how creativity springs out often of really difficult experiences. And it sounds like it did in your case, that there's something in the brain, we go through something that's a shock, that's a change in our
Mm-hmm.
routine, that's puts our world topsy-turvy, and that
Mm-hmm.
is a spark and a trigger for creativity. So journaling and some of these other coping mechanisms we come into, I have a Nashville singer-songwriter here, and she's just started to, I can hear songs are beginning, and maybe I think, there was a kind of an initial shock, and then you get your footing, and then you say, where is my flow? Where is my transcendence? What can I give to the world? What am I skilled at? Where are my passions? And if we can overlap those things, then we find a space of peace, and we find some transcendence, and we kind of lose some of the fear and terror and uncertainty. And it can all blossom into creativity that can open a new door.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I love your point about creativity. It's so important. And here's how it happened for me while I was going through this tragedy. And right now we're at home, so we have the space to pause and to reflect. At the time, there was no pandemic, so I had to do this on my own. And so I took a 1 year sabbatical, and I spent a lot of time thinking. And then my intuition blossomed from that because, and a lot of us are in tune to our intuition in different ways. And when we take the time to meditate and to pause, it triggers our intuition. In the book, I talk about active and dormant intuition because you know how you talk about creativity, intuition sparks that. And I interviewed someone from my book. She's an expert in it. And I said to her, why is it when I went on my sabbatical, my intuition just flourished? It was like a volcano erupting. Whereas when I'm busy and I'm so bogged down in work and day-to-day activities, like I just didn't, I feel like I didn't even hear that little voice speaking.
Wow. Yeah.
And she said to me, this is what happens when we take a pause in life. This is what happens when we make ourselves vulnerable, when we make ourselves authentic, when we shed the day-to-day titles and accolades. When we shed that, we're most vulnerable. And we spend the time to reflect and to think and to really think about our deepest desires. And that's what triggers the creativity. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, because this is exactly what happened to me on sabbatical. And even this book and the concept of holistic wealth, you know, it's funny, most people that go through grief, you know, they become so focused on the grief. But what this process was able to help me to do was to come up with a framework for overcoming it and for overcoming any type of setbacks. And I kid you not, if I had not channeled that, if I had not tuned into my intuition, taking a long break to pause and to really self-reflect, I don't think I could have done this. And I hear you talk about your daughter and her songwriting, and all of those skills come to the forefront when we really dig deep and think about what we really want. And then it triggers that. And especially when we take a moment to pause to do that.
Absolutely, because most of us, myself included, have spent a lot of our lives on a merry-go-round, and that merry-go-round spins fast, and there's a lot of stimulation, and there's a lot, you see it from all these different angles, and you don't want to miss it all. And sometimes we turn into a hamster on a wheel, not to bring a hackneyed cliche up, but I think that's it. And now when everything shuts off, there is an initial sensory it's just kind of this weird explosion of silence that I've been witnessing. I live right in Washington, D.C., and I look on Wisconsin Avenue, or walk down the street, or jog down the street a block away, and it's almost a ghost town. But I can do my part in this whole pandemic as a writer and interviewing people, but I can't change the big picture. So I think I'm not going to spend any time being anxious about it. I'm going to work as I can toward it. There's a spinning phase that we go through first before we step back and then let our mind try to help us decide who we are. This is much the process in my book, Happiness, Finding Fulfillment. When your kids leave home, it's the same thing. Your last kid leaves, and that is it's a loss, but it's a milestone, and it's a reminder of mortality. It's the same thing. It's jarring. It's arresting. I mentioned in my book the Buddhist theory of impermanence. You know, friends get some of your friends die, or your siblings are sick, or things happen, and then your kids leave, and you think, wow, life's not permanent. But out of that can come exactly what you're talking about, Keisha, a kind of a time when you sit back and say, okay, my time is precious. It's really what I have. So what do I populate it with? And how do I use my time and my skills and my passions and my relationships in the best way?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Well, bring me back to your book, because your book is something I should have had 25 years ago. So in my house, we don't say compound interest, which is a terrible thing. We should have said that, but we had so many kids. So, which is not a good thing to do. So your holistic wealth, I love the spin on that. 32 life lessons to help you find purpose, prosperity, and happiness. In that, I think this is also connected, right, to the loss of your husband. You have an economics background and know a lot about managing money and wealth management. So talk to me about that. How did your knowledge and your field and your economics training help you once your life suddenly kind of turned on its end when you lost your husband so young?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Judy, because it's so funny how you go through life and you never think about it's my profession or it's my field, and you put certain things in place and you're just doing it. You're basically doing it on autopilot because it's your field. But now that I look back, I'm so eternally grateful that my field had prepared me for what was to come, because we had put so many things in place just out of good planning. Lots of lessons there for sure. And so one of the things we did, and I call this the most important financial decision that we made and that I made, is to get a life insurance policy. And as soon as our first child was born, we took one out. And most of us have life insurance that comes with our mortgage. I want to caution that that will not be enough if we suffer a life-altering setback, because most of our mortgages have life insurance policies that only cover the balance that's left on the mortgage.
Oh, and that shrinks and you're getting older and you pay it off.
Exactly.
Even I can understand that.
Exactly. And so what will happen is that it might just be, as you mentioned, as you get older, it shrinks, and it might just be 50,000 that's left. Let's say if someone passes away,
right,
and that goes just straight. They're not going to give you that in your hand. It just goes to the balance. And so you're left with zero. Oh. And I mean, you have your house, which is a major asset. For most people, it's their most valuable piece of asset. And so that's great, but it won't cover the bills. And it won't get you to where you want to be in terms of developing financial. I talk about financial resilience and financial resourcefulness a lot. And it won't build towards that, which we need to. And we're seeing that in this pandemic, where some people are losing salaries now. And even though the salary was amazing and it's good to, but having extra sources of income adds to financial resourcefulness and financial resilience. And so we're seeing that now. And so going back to the life insurance, making sure that there's a policy in place that not only covers the balance on the mortgage, but gives you, especially if there are young kids involved, but gives you an extra allocation. So that if you, want to go back to school, start a new career, put the kids through school, through university, all of those things build towards being financially resourceful and financial resilience, because then you have an extra amount to invest in something else.
Well, let me say, what about today? What about the people that are very American in that they have not saved much for a rainy day? This is a rainy day, only we don't know how many days, right, Keisha?
Right.
So what about that? You talk about a financial advisor or a financial plan. But what about those that are already running kind of close to the wire? What kind of strategies, this is the hardest question, right? What kind of, I'm not giving you much time to be a financial planner, but what kind of strategies would you recommend they try to put in place? Obviously, they're going to have to dramatically budget.
Yes, no, for sure. And it's a question that I've gotten before, and I have an answer based on the situation I've been through, which is something that we're kind of all going through right now. And I've said this, if and most of us are at some point, if you're running close to the wire and you're thinking, okay, do I pay down debt? How much do I invest? Especially when I have little room. What I think we should all do is draft a budget and write down these two words: financial resilience. They're actually four: financial resourcefulness, and put 2 columns down, because there's going to come a day like this. The rainy days come, they eventually come, and building towards that rainy day will get us through this. So yes, I think we need to put some on debt. We need to put some amount to pay down debt, but we can't allocate 100% to that, because while it's paying down the debt, it's not making us financially resourceful. It's building on being financially resilient to a point, but it's not getting us there. It's probably getting us halfway there, because at least if we're not in debt, then it's not so bad.
Right.
But we need to save a bit and invest a bit and maximize that any way we can, so it makes us that much more financially resilient. We talk about having an emergency savings fund and investing where we can, and even if it's a tiny amount, we just need to make sure that we're building on that amount so that we know that when those setbacks come, we're in a better position where we need to have 6 weeks, like what some people are losing jobs right now and probably won't get to apply for benefits or won't receive them until 6 weeks time. I'm hearing even May, as is the case in the US, that we can have that amount to tide us over until we get back on track, or we get those funds that we're waiting on. And so I think it's very important. And different people, it's so amazing. I've listened to financial experts, and I'm not a financial advisor, I'm an economist, but I listen to financial experts saying, yeah, allocate 100% to paying debt. And I'm like, no, you can do it, but I don't think it's a good strategy. I think putting down some, even if it's $50 biweekly, even if it's per month, I think that will get you on a path, and looking to constantly increase it, then I think that's even better. And then, of course, if we can have like other sources of income, passive income, whatever that may be, that's aligned with our field and our expertise, is also very good. Because as you can see, like those people who have multiple sources of income are probably in a much better position right now.
Right. No, absolutely. Pulling back to the bigger picture, a little bit away from the finances, because again, that's so tricky. Everybody's situation is so different. But what advice can you give all our happiness listeners about just kind of big picture, sort of psychological advice? Your book has a lot of philosophy, and I love the video on your website. Your website is, remind everybody, what's the name of your website if people want to go look at the video that your husband made on your website?
Oh, so it's KeishaBlair.com. And if I'm thinking about the video that you're referencing, is that the moments I miss? Is that the video?
That's 40. I think it was 40 things, maybe.
Okay, yes. So that was based on the article, and my husband did that. Yes, it was based on the viral article. It's a 40 life lessons video.
Yeah. And that sort of thing is great. And I loved looking at that and showed it to my son, and we both talked about that. That's a nice thing. But that's a lot of what's in your website, and a lot of what you talk about is, certainly you have a lot of economic and kind of financial information that most of us don't have. But what advice in big picture, just about humanity and emotions and psychology and just through your personal experience, what advice can you give all of us about facing life's uncertainties, this big, uncertain, bizarre twilight zone that we've just parachuted into without warning?
Yeah, no, it's very difficult, because as we're going through it, we're also learning, and that learning about it and learning about ourselves and how we cope. And that was true for me when my husband died, as I was learning what he had, what was to come. And it's a difficult period. And so you're learning about the circumstances of what we're in, as in the case in this pandemic, which also brings grief with it on a daily basis as we learn, right? Because we're seeing people die. We're hearing of other people that we know of who are sick and who are exposed. And so there's a daily grief. And it's so funny, because that's exactly what I went through. And so as the reports came back, there's a daily grief happening. There's something chipping away at something else at you on a daily basis until finally it lets up. And so what I would implore your audience to do is just to take it one day at a time, to go one step at a time, and not to worry so much. And it's okay to feel the feelings that you're feeling right now. It's okay to walk through it. It's okay to cry if you feel like crying. Journal, write about it, write about your feelings. And I have this thing that I developed called the holistic wealth mindset and method. And the holistic wealth method, in hindsight, got me through a lot of what I went through. And for us right now, we're in a position where we're going to have to be making decisions on a daily basis. And in the book, I mentioned that each one of us makes 36,000 decisions every single day. And so cultivating that holistic wealth mindset is key, because the holistic wealth method basically asks you to think about your decisions and think about what may be a deposit to your holistic wealth bank account and what may be a withdrawal. And if spending too much time on social media becomes a withdrawal, then that's a problem. And if we're doing things, like toxic relationships or
Yeah.
eating unhealthy. And so what I would implore everyone to do now is look at your daily life, look at your daily decisions, and be mindful of them.
Hmm.
Um, Live intentionally, because in the book I talk about living intentionally and living an intentionally designed life. And part of that is weighing every single decision. And so if the news cycle is beginning to make you sick, is beginning to make you feel like you want to crawl under your bed and cry, then I think we need to take a step back and maybe watch one news report,
Right.
maybe in the beginning of the day and the end of the day, whatever works for you. And that's how we can get through this, so that by the time this is done, we still have a sense of ourselves. We
Right.
still feel strong, so that we can deal with whatever comes at the end. Because I think we're just starting.
Yeah.
It seems like we've been running a marathon already through this, but we're really just starting. We haven't hit the peak yet, I don't think, in North America. So we have to reserve our energies. We have to reserve all of that. And so I think it's important to kind of cultivate that mindset and live intentionally, so that we'll be better prepared, and we can get through this just on a day-to-day basis.
Right, and that's so interesting that I do a ballet bar class every day now online with my furniture pushed out of the way. But for years I've done that. I'm an old broken down competitive figure skater, but now I'm doing ballet bar and that, like yoga classes, like meditation. There's lots of talk about setting your intention and being mindful. And I think for people, Keisha, that are a little out of the mindfulness circles, that sounds a little pie in the sky. Or I've had people tell me I don't have time for mindfulness, and I think, no, wait. But it's about finding that kind of calm, mindful, peaceful space and slowing down enough that you can be far more effective and have a much stronger psychological and emotional grip, which then leads to a more holistic sort of path, right?
Absolutely. And it's so important. We released the Holistic Wealth Personal Workbook back in February, and I have this diagram. I have two diagrams in it on mindfulness, because the cost of the opposite, which is mindlessness, can lead to stunted growth and potential, because it's so funny how many decisions we make mindlessly. And so just being mindful, and being mindful can just mean tuning in to each action that we're doing, and really taking stock of what we're doing, and what might be the consequences over time. And so mindfulness is so critical to be able to achieve holistic wealth, because it's so funny, even in our spending habits. People have been panic buying and buying things we might not
Right.
need, and stocking up. And it's good to stock up, but if you're blowing your budget, then that's a problem. And so just being mindful in terms of our spending, in terms of our planning, in terms of, you mentioned the yoga and activities that enrich our holistic wealth bank accounts, is very, very important to getting us through this period, and not causing all sorts of issues in other aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. No, that's wonderful. So just wrapping up, Keisha, what did I forget to ask you? You have such a wealth of knowledge and experience in a lot of different realms, and the philosophical is what always piques my interest the most. What did I forget to ask you? Is there anything that you want to add? Just words of wisdom, a closing note for people out there who are often, many of whom are kind of in a state of spinning and lost in space and Twilight Zone, and what am I doing here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Like, I feel like we've covered pretty much everything. And I hear you on the philosophical parts, because that helped me through this a lot. And, it's funny, because in the book I talk about the different laws of holistic wealth. And I talk about the law of abundance, the law of lifelong learning, and I think there's 6 of them in total that are in the book. But I really feel like for us, we have an amazing opportunity right now. It may not seem like it. It might seem like the end of the world, but we have this tremendous opportunity to channel our lives in the way we want to, and to do the things that can help us get there. And, in the book, I talk about having a personal mission and writing a personal mission statement, and that's all a part of it, because we have this time. that could probably work out to be a gift for some of us, in terms of this tragedy, but in terms of how we use that space that we have now. And so I would just implore everyone listening to use the time wisely as you can, because this period could be a blessing for some of us. And I mean, I know for those who are suffering a job loss or people who are ill, it might not seem that way. It might seem like it's the opposite. But I remember when I looked back at my husband's death, I thought the tragedy wasn't a gift, but the way it allowed me to grow, it was an eternal gift. And so those would be my parting words. See how you can maximize the time, channel your creativities, do the things that really make you happy, and spend time with those loved ones. Now, we might not get this time back that we have now, and time is our precious resource. And so channel that and use it to make it better for you. Use it to make life better and to come out of this better than you were before. And I think we'll all look back at this if we do that, with a sense of renewed perspective, which I think is needed, in a lot of ways in these circumstances.
Absolutely. Well, Keisha Blair, thank you so much, and thank you for talking about your book with us, Holistic Wealth. And it sounds good. I wish I had picked it up 20 years before you wrote it. But anyway, thank you so much. And I will be back in touch, and I'm sure all our listeners will appreciate, and readers, because I'm going to write this into a blog and send it out a newsletter. So thank you a million for this, and I will certainly be back in touch.
Thank you for having me, Judy. It was wonderful. It was so great speaking with you, and I love hearing from listeners. And I'm on social media. I'm at Twitter and Instagram at Keisha Blair, and Facebook at Keisha Blair Author. And yes, again, my website is keishablair.com. I'm looking forward to sharing this episode, Judy, with my listeners and with my readers as well. And I was so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Keisha, Keisha.
Yes.
Keisha and Keisha Blair. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.